There are moments that test the measure of a man's heart. And for Jedediah Crane, that moment came floating down the Bitterroot River on a quiet August morning. The sight of a helpless puppy, paralyzed and drowning, struck him deeper than any loss he'd known in his 63 years. Jed was a mountain man who'd lived alone for decades, keeping his distance from the world and its troubles. But something about that small, struggling creature called to him. Without hesitation, he waded into the cold water and pulled the pup to safety. What started as a simple rescue would become something much more powerful. The bond between the grizzled trapper and the broken puppy would heal them both in ways neither expected. Could saving one small life really change everything for a man who'd given up on hope? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist still clung to the valley floor as Jedediah Crane carried the shivering bundle of golden fur back to his cabin. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of trapping and mountain living, cradled the paralyzed puppy with surprising gentleness. The dog's eyes, deep brown and trusting despite everything, gazed up at him with an expression that stirred something long buried in Yet's chest. His cabin sat perched on a natural ledge overlooking the Bitterroot River, a sturdy structure he built with his own hands 30 years ago when he first retreated to these mountains. The logs had weathered to a silver gray, and the stone chimney rose like a sentinel against the Montana sky. Wild roses climbed along the south-facing wall, their pink blooms a testament to the few soft touches he'd allowed himself over the years. Inside, the cabin reflected a man who valued function over comfort. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for a single framed photograph turned face down. Hand-hewn furniture filled the space, a sturdy table. 2 chairs, though, he never entertained guests. Shelves lined with books on wilderness, survival, animal husbandry, and warm volumes of poetry that few would expect a mountain man to own. Jed set the puppy on a thick wool blanket near the fireplace and knelt beside him. The dog's hind legs lay useless, dragging behind as he tried to move. "Easy there, little fella," Jed murmured, his voice rusty from disuse. "You're safe now." The puppy whimpered softly, trying to lift his head. Jed could see the intelligence in those eyes, the spirit that hadn't been broken despite his condition. Something about that determination reminded him of he pushed the thought away before it could fully form. "River," he said suddenly. "That's what I'll call you. River, on account of where I found you." The puppy's tail gave a weak wag, as if approving of his new name. Jed rose and moved to a pine chest in the corner, retrieving supplies he kept for treating injured animals. Over the years, he doctored everything from wounded deer to sick hawks. But this felt different. This wasn't just about healing. It was about connection, something he'd sworn off long ago as he worked. Cleaning River's matted fur and checking for other injuries, memories threatened to surface. The laughter of children playing by a different river, small hands helping him tie fishing knots, a woman's voice calling them in for supper. He'd built these mountains around him like a fortress, keeping those memories at bay. But this injured pup seemed to breach walls he thought were impenetrable. The sun climbed higher, filling the cabin with golden light. River had fallen asleep, his small chest rising and falling peacefully. Jed found himself studying the dog's face, noting the white markings around his eyes, the way his ears flopped forward even in sleep. A knock at the door shattered the quiet. Jed froze. In 30 years, he could count on one hand the number of unexpected visitors. He moved to the window and peered through the curtain. A woman stood on his porch mid-40s, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, carrying a black medical bag. "Mr. Crane?" she called. "I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell from Calico Bend. I heard you might have an injured animal that needs attention." Jed opened the door cautiously. Dr. Mitchell was smaller than she'd appeared through the window, but her green eyes held a steady confidence that commanded respect. She wore practical clothes jeans, boots, a flannel shirt that had seen honest work. "Who told you that?" Jed asked, his voice gruff. "Tom Bradley saw you at the river this morning," she explained. "Said you pulled something out of the water. I run the veterinary clinic in town, and I make house calls for emergencies." Jed hesitated. Letting her in meant letting the outside world into his sanctuary. But River needed proper medical attention, and his pride wasn't worth the pup's suffering. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Sarah's eyes immediately found River sleeping by the fireplace. She knelt beside him, her movements careful and professional. "Oh, you poor little thing," she whispered. "May I examine him?" Jed nodded, watching as she ran experienced hands over River's small body. Her touch was gentle but thorough, checking reflexes, testing responses. River woke during the examination but remained calm, seeming to sense her benevolent intentions. "Spinal injury," Sarah confirmed, her voice soft but clinical. "Likely from trauma. Could be from a fall, being dropped, or—" She paused, noting Yet's darkening expression. "The good news is he doesn't appear to be in pain. Dogs are remarkably adaptable creatures. Will he walk again?" Jed asked, though he tried to keep his tone disinterested. Sarah sat back on her heels. "It's hard to say. Sometimes there's improvement. Over time, sometimes not. But he can still have a full, happy life with the right care." She studied Yet's weathered face. "Are you planning to keep him?" The question hung in the air. Jed looked down at River, who'd somehow wiggled closer to his boots and was now resting his head against the worn leather. Such a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about trust and hope. "I reckon so," he said quietly. A smile touched Sarah's lips, the first genuine warmth she'd shown since arriving. "He'll need special care. Assistance with mobility, physical therapy, regular checkups. It's a big commitment. I've handled difficult cases before. Wild animals are different from domestic pets, Mr. Crane. This little guy will bond with you. He'll depend on you not just for survival, but for companionship, love." She paused. "Are you prepared for that kind of relationship?" Jed felt something twist in his chest. Love. He'd locked that word away along with everything else when he came to these mountains. But looking at River, seeing the trust in those brown eyes, he found himself nodding. "What do I need to know?" he asked. For the next hour, Sarah walked him through River's care. She left supplies, special food, medications, instructions for physical therapy exercises. As she prepared to leave, she turned back. "Mr. Crane, I've lived in Calico Bend my whole life. I know your reputation as a hermit, someone who prefers animals to people." Her voice was gentle but direct. "But what you did today, rescuing this puppy, that takes heart. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." After she left, Jed sat in his chair by the fireplace, River sleeping at his feet. The cabin felt different somehow, less like a fortress and more like a home. He reached for the leather journal he kept on the side table, 30 years of entries documenting weather, wildlife movements, his simple daily routines. But tonight he wrote something different. August 15th. Found a pup in the river today. Half-drowned, paralyzed in his back legs. Named him River. Dr. Mitchell says he might not walk again, but he's got spirit. Reminds me of better times. Maybe it's time to stop running from what was and start building something new." He closed the journal and looked down at River, who had opened his eyes and was watching him with what could only be described as adoration. "Well, boy," Jed said softly, "I guess we're in this together now." Outside, a Montana wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the promise of change. For the first time in 3 decades, Jedediah Crane wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. He had River now, and River had him. It was a beginning. Neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the cabin walls. On the mantel, the face-down photograph remained untouched, but its presence felt less heavy somehow. Healing, Jed was beginning to understand, sometimes started with the smallest acts of compassion, like pulling a drowning puppy from a river and choosing to believe that broken things could still be beautiful. River stretched in his sleep, his small body warm against Yet's boot, and for the first time in years, the mountain man smiled. Really, truly smiled. Tomorrow would bring challenges, he knew. But tonight, in this moment, there was peace. There was hope. There was love, even if he wasn't quite ready to name it yet. The mountains that had been his prison were becoming his sanctuary, and the broken puppy sleeping by his feet was showing him the way home to his own heart. 3 days passed before Sarah returned. Jed had settled into a rhythm with River carrying him outside for fresh air, helping him eat, talking to him in low, gentle tones that surprised them both. The pup's spirit remained unbroken despite his limitations, and his trust in Jed grew stronger with each passing hour. The knock came just after breakfast. Jed opened the door to find Sarah holding an official-looking envelope along with her medical bag. "How's our patient?" she asked, but her smile seemed forced. "See for yourself," Jed said, stepping aside. River had positioned himself by the window, where the morning sun streamed in, his tail wagging at the sight of Sarah. She knelt beside him, running her hands along his spine with practiced efficiency. "His muscle tone is actually improving," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "You've been doing the exercises I showed you?" Jed nodded. "Twice daily, just like you said." Sarah completed her examination and sat back on her heels. Her expression grew serious as she pulled out the envelope. "Mr. Crane, I need to talk to you about River's long-term prognosis." Something in her tone made Yet's stomach tighten. "What are you saying?" "I had his x-rays developed at the regional animal hospital." She opened the envelope and spread the films on his kitchen table. "The damage to his spinal cord is extensive. There's significant compression here and here." She pointed to dark areas on the images. "I'm afraid the likelihood of him ever regaining full use of his hind legs is, well, it's virtually non-existent." The words hit Jed like a physical blow. He'd been holding on to hope, watching for signs of improvement, believing that love and determination could overcome anything. The x-rays stared back at him, cold and unforgiving. "You're saying he'll never walk again," Jed said flatly. "I'm saying it's extremely unlikely. Dogs can adapt remarkably well to mobility challenges. But this level of injury—" Sarah's voice trailed off as she saw the change in Yet's expression. The old walls were slamming back into place. Jed could feel it happening, the familiar retreat into himself. Hope was dangerous. Hope led to disappointment, and disappointment led to the kind of pain he'd sworn never to experience again. "Maybe it would be kinder," he began, but stopped when River lifted his head and looked directly at him. Those brown eyes held no self-pity, no surrender, just pure, unwavering trust. River didn't know he was supposed to be hopeless. He didn't understand that his condition was permanent. All he knew was that this gruff mountain man had saved him, cared for him, and become his whole world. Sarah watched the silent exchange between man and dog. "Mr. Crane, I know this is difficult news, but River doesn't see himself as broken. He sees himself as loved." Jed turned away from the window, his jaw tight. "Love doesn't heal spinal cords, Doc. No, but it heals hearts. And sometimes that's more important." Sarah gathered the x-rays. "I've seen dogs with injuries like this live full, joyful lives. It requires commitment, patience, and yes, love. But it's possible. I ain't equipped for a lifetime of—" Jed stopped himself, realizing how harsh he sounded. River was watching him with those trusting eyes, completely unaware that his future was being decided. Sarah stood slowly. Take some time to think about it. But don't make this decision based on fear. Fear? The word came out sharper than Jed intended. Fear of getting too attached. Fear of losing something you care about. Fear of being responsible for another living being's happiness. Sarah's voice was gentle but unflinching. I may not know your whole story, Mr. Crane, but I recognize the signs. After she left, Jed sat in his chair staring at River. The pup had dragged himself over and was now resting his head on Yet's boot, content just to be close. Such simple trust. Such uncomplicated love. Memories crashed over him like a spring flood, Emma's laughter echoing through a different house. Little Sarah named for his mother, taking her first steps across a living room floor. 10-year-old Michael teaching the family dog to fetch. All had gone in one terrible night 30 years ago. He'd been away on a hunting trip, guiding some city folks through the wilderness for extra money. The propane heater had malfunctioned while they slept. Carbon monoxide. Silent. Invisible. Deadly. He'd come home to find his entire world reduced to ashes and graves. The guilt had consumed him. If he'd been there. If he'd checked the heater. Before leaving. If he'd stayed home instead of chasing a few extra dollars. The ifs had driven him into these mountains, where he'd convinced himself that isolation was safety, that not caring was the only way to avoid the crushing weight of lost Dot. But River didn't know about any of that. River only knew that someone had pulled him from the water, given him a name, and promised him safety. How could he break that promise because of his own fear? Jed picked up the face-down photograph from the mantel, the first time he touched it in years. Emma's smile beamed. Back at him, her arms around their 2 children, beside a lake in Glacier National Park. They'd been so happy that day, so alive. What would you do, Em? He whispered to the photograph. You always were braver than me. River whimpered softly, sensing Yet's distress. The pup couldn't come to him, couldn't offer comfort the way a healthy dog might. But his presence was enough. His simple existence in this moment was a reminder that life, even damaged life, still had value. Jed knelt beside River and gently stroked his golden fur. I'm scared, boy, he admitted aloud. Scared of loving something and losing it again. Scared of not being enough for you. Scared of failing you the way I failed them. River's tail wagged weakly, and he stretched to lick Yet's weathered hand. In that moment, Jed understood something profound. River's injury didn't make him less worthy of love. It made him more precious. This broken puppy needed him in a way his family never had. They'd been whole, complete, capable of thriving without him. But River would live or die based on Yet's choice. The decision crystallized with startling clarity. This wasn't about fixing River or making him whole. This was about accepting that broken didn't mean worthless, that damage didn't mean disposable. This was about choosing love despite the risk, hope despite the odds. Jed set the photograph back on the mantel, this time facing outward. Emma's smile seemed to approve of his choice. All right, River, he said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. Looks like we're going to figure this out together. You and me against the world, just like it should be. River's tail wagged harder, and for the first time since the X-rays, Jed smiled. The diagnosis hadn't changed. The prognosis remained grim. But something fundamental had shifted in Yet's heart. He was no longer running from love. He was running toward it, one careful step at a time. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, but inside the cabin, there was warmth. There was commitment. There was the beginning of something that would transform them both in ways neither could yet imagine. River had his person, and Jed had his purpose. The real journey was just beginning. The idea came to Jed in the middle of the night, watching River struggle to move around the cabin. The pup's determination was heartbreaking. He dragged himself everywhere with his front legs, his useless hindquarters trailing behind. His spirit never flagged, but Jed could see the effort it took. The way River would pause to rest more frequently each day. At dawn, Jed made his way to the workshop behind his cabin. The small building housed tools he'd collected over 3 decades. Of mountain living hand planes, chisels, a lathe he'd built himself. Dust motes danced in the morning light streaming through cobwebbed windows as he selected pieces of seasoned pine from his lumber pile. He'd built mobility aids before, for wild animals he'd found injured over the years. A splint for a hawk's wing, a temporary brace for a deer's broken leg before releasing it back to the forest. But this was different. This needed to be permanent, comfortable, something River could live with for the rest of his life. Jed sketched rough plans on a piece of bark with a pencil stub, a lightweight frame that would support River's hindquarters, with wheels that could handle both the smooth cabin floors and the rougher terrain outside. It had to be adjustable as River grew, sturdy enough for daily use, yet gentle enough not to cause discomfort. The work consumed him in a way nothing had for years. His hands remembered the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and functional. As he shaped the wood, memories surfaced, unbidden, building a treehouse with his son Michael, teaching little Sarah to whittle her first whistle. He'd forgotten how much he'd once enjoyed sharing his skills with children. By afternoon, the basic frame was taking shape. Jed had fashioned it with gentle curves to cradle River's body, padded with soft leather from an old jacket. The wheels came from a broken wheelbarrow he'd salvaged years ago, still perfectly round and smooth. Rolling. River watched from the workshop doorway, his head tilted with curiosity. Jed found himself talking to the pup as he worked, explaining each step the way he'd once explained carpentry to his children. See, the key is balance, boy. Too much weight in the back, and you'll tip over. Too much in front, and you can't steer properly. Jed held up a curved piece of wood. This part here cradles your belly, distributes the weight evenly. River's tail wagged, as if he understood every word. When Sarah arrived for her weekly checkup, she found them both in the workshop. Jed was making final adjustments to the cart, while River supervised from his blanket. "My goodness," Sarah breathed, examining the handcrafted mobility device. "This is remarkable work, Mr. Crane." Jed felt heat rise in his cheeks. Just something to help him get around. Sarah ran her hands over the smooth wood, noting the careful attention to every detail. The padding was thick and soft, the straps designed to distribute pressure evenly. The wheels were perfectly aligned, and the whole contraption was surprisingly lightweight. "Have you tested it with him yet?" she asked. "Wanted to make sure it was safe first," Jed admitted. "Don't want to hurt him." Together, they lifted River into the cart. The pup tensed at first, uncertain about this strange new contraption, but Jed's gentle voice and steady hands calmed him. "Easy, River. Just trying something new here." They adjusted the straps carefully, ensuring River was secure but comfortable. His front paws touched the ground naturally, and his weight was evenly supported by the cart. Sarah checked the fit thoroughly, making small adjustments to the padding. "How does that feel, boy?" Jed asked. River tentatively took a step forward. The cart rolled smoothly behind him. He stopped, looked back at the wheels with surprise, then took another step. And another. Suddenly, as if a light had switched on, River understood. His tail began wagging furiously as he discovered he could move freely again. He took off across the workshop, the cart rolling silently behind him, his front legs carrying him with renewed confidence. Jed watched with an expression Sarah had never seen before, pure joy mixed with deep satisfaction. This gruff mountain man had just given a disabled puppy his freedom back, and the emotion on his weathered face was beautiful to behold. River made a lap around the workshop, then came straight to Jed, pressing against his legs with enthusiasm. The message was clear. "Thank you. I think he approves," Sarah said softly. Over the following days, River adapted to his cart with remarkable speed. What had started as tentative steps became confident movement. He could navigate the cabin, explore the immediate area around the tow property, even manage the gentle slope down to the river where Jed had first found him. Jed found himself taking longer walks, letting River explore at his own pace. The pup's joy was infectious. He'd race ahead as far as his leash allowed, then circle back to check on Jed, his whole body wiggling with excitement. The cart had given him more than mobility. It had given him dignity. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Jed retrieved his leather journal and wrote, August 28th. Finished River's cart today. Took him 3 tries to understand it, but once he figured it out, there was no stopping him. Reminded me of teaching the kids to ride their bicycles. Same look of wonder and achievement. Same pure happiness. Haven't felt pride like this in 30 years, maybe longer. He paused, pen hovering over the page, then added, Emma would have loved this pup. She always said broken things just needed someone to see their potential. Maybe she was talking about more than I realized at the time. River had fallen asleep by Yet's chair, the cart positioned beside him like a trusted companion. Even in sleep, one of his paws rested on the cart's frame, as if making sure it wouldn't disappear. Jed reached down and gently stroked River's golden fur. The pup stirred but didn't wake, secure in the knowledge that he was safe, loved, and free to move through his world with dignity. The handmade cart represented more than mobility. It was proof that broken things could be made functional again, that limitations could be overcome with creativity and love. It was Yet's first real gift to River, but more than that, it was his gift to himself, the rediscovery of his ability to create something meaningful, to solve problems with his hands and heart working together. Outside, the Montana night settled. Over the mountains. Inside the cabin, a man and his dog rested peacefully, both of them more whole than they'd been that morning. The cart sat ready for tomorrow's adventures, a wooden testament to the power of refusing to accept that. Broken meant finished. Jed closed his journal and settled back in his chair. Tomorrow he'd take River further down the trail, maybe even to the meadow where wildflowers grew thick in late summer. The pup deserved to see beauty, to experience the full richness of the world, despite his limitations. For the first time in decades, Jed was planning for tomorrow with anticipation rather than mere survival. River's cart had rolled them both toward a future neither had dared imagine just 2 weeks ago. The photograph had been face up on the mantel for 2 weeks now, and each morning Jed found his eyes drawn to it. Emma's smile no longer felt like an accusation. It felt like encouragement. So when River looked up at him with those trusting brown eyes, Jed found himself doing something he hadn't done in 30 years. He talked about his family. See that woman there, River? Jed pointed to the photograph while the pup rested beside his chair. That's Emma, my wife. She had the kindest heart you ever did see. Would have loved you to pieces, boy. River's tail thumped against the floor, as if he could hear the love in Yet's voice. And those 2 young ones, that's Sarah and Michael, my daughter and son. Yet's voice caught slightly. Sarah was about your age when we lost them. Well, she was 7, but she had that same spirit you do. Never let anything stop her. These one-sided conversations became a daily ritual. As River grew stronger and more confident in his cart, Jed found himself sharing memories that had been locked away. For decades, the pup listened with the perfect attention only dogs could provide. No judgment, no interruption, just pure presence. Their peaceful routine was shattered on a crisp September morning when Jed heard voices outside his cabin. Through the window, he saw 3 young men examining his woodpile. One was clearly the leader, tall, lean, with the kind of swagger that spelled trouble. The other two followed his lead as he pointed toward the workshop. Jed stepped onto his porch, River's car rolling beside him. "You boys lost?" The leader turned, his eyes immediately dismissing Jed as an old man and fixing on River. "Well, Lukey, here." Old Hermit's got himself a crippled mud. The casual cruelty in the words made Yet's hands clench into fists. "I asked if you were lost." "Just passing through," the leader said with a smirk. "Name's Jake Morrison. These are my friends, Pete and Danny. We heard there might be some valuable stuff up here. Old traps, maybe some antique tools." "Nothing here for sale," Jed said flatly. Jake's eyes swept over the property with obvious calculation. "Shame to let all this go to waste. Old man like you, living alone with just a broken dog for company." River growled low in his throat, the first time Jed had heard him make any aggressive sound. The pup positioned himself protectively in front of Jed, despite being confined to his cart. "Smart dog," Jake sneered. "Knows he's useless. Probably be a kindness to put him out of his misery." That's when Jed moved. 30 years of mountain living had kept him strong, and his hand was on Jake's throat before the young man could react. The other two stepped back, suddenly aware they'd misjudged the situation. "You best watch your mouth, boy," Jed said quietly, his voice carrying more threat than any shout. "And you best get off my property, now." Jake struggled against Yet's grip, his eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Hey, old man, we were just leaving," Jed finished. "And if I see you boys around here again, we'll have a different kind of conversation." He released Jake, who stumbled backward, rubbing his throat. The three young men retreated quickly, but Jake called over his shoulder, "This ain't over, old man." After they disappeared into the tree line, Jed knelt beside River, who was still trembling with protective anger. "Easy, boy. They're gone." But the encounter had shaken something loose in Jed. River had tried to defend him. This broken, paralyzed puppy had positioned himself between Jed and perceived danger. The loyalty and courage in that gesture humbled him completely. That evening, for the first time, Jed pulled the faded family photograph from the mantel and held it where River could see it clearly. "I need to tell you something, River," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "I wasn't always alone up here. I had a family once, a real family." River watched intently as Jed traced the faces in the photograph with one weathered finger. "Emma was the strongest woman I ever knew. Could outfish me, outshoot me, and probably outfight me if it came to it. And these babies," his voice broke slightly. "Sarah loved animals the way you love people, unconditionally. Michael was going to be a carpenter like his old man. Had the hands for it already at 10 years old." Jed set the photograph on the side table where River could continue to see it. "I lost them, boy. Lost them all in one night because I wasn't there when they needed me. Been running from that guilt ever since." River made a soft whimpering sound and somehow managed to maneuver his cart closer to Yet's chair. He rested his head on Yet's knee, offering what comfort he could. "But you know what I figured out today?" Jed continued, stroking River's soft ears. "Running away from love doesn't protect you from loss. It just guarantees you'll lose everything that matters while you're still breathing." The admission hung in the air between them. River's presence warm, accepting, completely without judgment, made it safe for Jed to voice truths he'd never spoken aloud. "You tried to protect me today, River. This little broken body of yours, and you still put yourself between me and danger. That's not weakness, boy. That's courage. That's love." Jed picked up his journal and wrote by lamplight while River dozed. September 15th. Had trouble today with some young thugs. River tried to defend me despite his condition. Made me realize I've been thinking about strength all wrong. Strength isn't avoiding pain. It's choosing to love despite the risk of loss. River knows this instinctively. Maybe it's time I learned from him. Showed him Emma's picture tonight. Told him about the kids. Felt like introducing him to family. In a way, I suppose I was dot as the fire burned low. Jed gazed at the photograph. One more time. Emma's eyes seemed to sparkle with approval, and for the first time in 30 years, he felt like he wasn't disappointing her memory. River shifted in his sleep, one paw reaching out to touch Jet's boot. Such a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes about trust, about connection, about the healing power of choosing to love despite fear. The photograph would stay face up now, permanently. River deserved to know about the family that came before him. And Emma deserved to meet the brave little dog who was teaching her husband how to live again. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the scent of changing seasons. Inside the cabin, man and dog rested in the warm glow of acceptance of the past, of each other, and of the possibility that broken hearts, like broken bodies, could still hold infinite capacity for love. 3 days after the confrontation, Jed heard footsteps on his porch again. This time, River's reaction was different, curious rather than protective. Through the window, Jed saw a solitary figure, Jake Morrison, but the swagger was gone. The young man stood uncertainly at the edge of the porch, hand shoved deep in his pockets. Jed opened the door cautiously, River rolling up beside him in his cart. "Mr. Crane?" Jake's voice was subdued, respectful. Could I talk to you for a minute?" Up close, without the bravado of his friends, Jake looked younger. Maybe 17, with hollow cheeks that spoke of too many missed meals and eyes. That held the kind of weariness that didn't belong on a teenage face. "Depends on what you want to talk about," Jed said. "I wanted to apologize for what I said about your dog. That was..." Jake struggled for words. "That was cruel. And I wanted to explain why I was really here." Jed studied the boy's face, noting the genuine remorse. "Go on." "I wasn't looking to steal anything." "Well, not exactly." Jake's shoulders sagged. "My dad lost his job at the mill 3 months ago. We're behind on rent, got no food in the house. I heard people in town talking about the old mountain man who might have valuable stuff. I thought maybe..." He stopped, shame coloring his features. River rolled closer to Jake, looking up at him with curious eyes. The boy automatically reached down to pet him, then caught himself. "It's all right," Jed said quietly. "He likes attention." Jake knelt and gently stroked River's head. "I never seen a dog in a wheelchair before. Does it hurt him?" "No. He was born with a damaged spine. The cart just helps him get around." Jake watched River maneuver his cart with obvious skill. "He seems happy. Happier than he has any right to be," Jed agreed. "What happened to your dad's job?" The question opened floodgates. Jake explained about the mill closure, his father's drinking, his mother working double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on, about being the oldest of 3 kids, feeling responsible for holding the family together. "I dropped out of school to look for work," Jake admitted. "But there's nothing in Calico Bend for someone like me. No skills, no experience." Jed listened without judgment, recognizing the desperation in the boy's voice. It reminded him of his own youth before. He'd learned the skills that made him self-sufficient in these mountains. "You ever work with your hands?" Jed asked. Jake shrugged. "Some. Help my uncle with odd jobs when he's got them. But I'm not trained in anything useful." Jed looked at the boy's hands, young, strong, capable of learning. Then he looked at River, who had somehow maneuvered his cart so he was sitting between them, as if trying to bridge the distance. "I've got work that needs doing," Jed said slowly. "Winter's coming. Need to repair the roof, split more firewood, winterize the workshop. Could use help with River's therapy sessions, too." Jake's head snapped up. "You'd pay me? Fair wage for fair work. But there are conditions. Anything. First, you apologize to River properly. What you said about him was wrong. Yet's voice carried quiet authority. Second, you work alone. I don't want your friends anywhere near my property. Jake nodded eagerly. They're not really my friends. Anyway, when you're desperate, you make bad choices. Third, Jed continued, you treat this place and everything on it with respect. That includes River, me, and yourself. Yes, sir. And finally, while you're here, you'll learn something useful. Real skills you can use to build a life. Jake's eyes widened. You'd teach me? Carpentry, basic mechanics, animal care, wilderness, survival. Things that matter. Jed paused. But only if you're serious about learning. The transformation in Jake's posture was immediate. Hope replaced desperation. Purpose replaced aimlessness. When do I start? Tomorrow. Sunrise. That evening, Jed found himself in his workshop, preparing for his first student in 30 years. He taught his own children these skills, patiently guiding small hands as they learned to shape wood and fix broken things. The memory no longer brought only pain. It brought anticipation. River watched from his blanket as Jed organized tools and planned lessons. What do you think, boy? Can we teach that young man to see his own worth? River's tail wagged, and Jed took it as approval. Jake arrived the next morning before sunrise, eager and nervous. Jed started him with basic tasks, sorting tools, organizing materials, learning the proper names for everything. But he also began teaching immediately, explaining the why behind every action. See, Jake, carpentry isn't just about cutting wood. Jed explained as they worked on roof repairs. It's about understanding grain, respecting the material, working with its natural properties instead of against them. Jake absorbed everything with surprising intensity. His hands were indeed capable, and his mind was sharp despite his lack of formal education. More importantly, he was gentle with River, naturally including the pup in their activities and understanding his limitations without treating him as fragile. During lunch breaks, Jake would sit with River, helping with the physical therapy exercises Sarah had taught them. The pup seemed to enjoy the extra attention, and Jake found satisfaction in contributing to River's care. He's getting stronger, Jake observed one afternoon, watching River navigate his cart with increasing confidence. Body and spirit, Jed agreed. Sometimes the spirit heals first and pulls the body along. On Friday of Jake's first week, Jed watched the young man carefully carve a walking stick from a piece of seasoned oak. The work was meticulous, patient, showing real craftsmanship. Potential. That's fine work, Jed said, examining the smooth finish and ergonomic grip. Jake flushed with pride. My grandfather used a walking stick like this. Arthritis in his hands. I always wanted to make him one, but he shrugged. Never had the skills. You have them now. That evening, Jed made a special entry in his journal. September 22nd. Jake's. Been here a week now. Reminds me of myself, at that age hungry to learn, eager to prove himself. He's got good hands and a good heart. River's taken to him completely. Strange how helping someone else teaches you things about yourself. Haven't felt this useful in years. The walking stick he carved today would make any craftsman proud. More importantly, he carved it with love and purpose. Maybe that's what I've been missing. A chance to pass something meaningful on to the next generation. As the fire crackled that night, Jed watched River sleep peacefully by his chair. The walking stick Jake had carved sat propped against the mantle, a symbol of growth and potential. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, new opportunities to build something meaningful together. The isolated mountain man was discovering that solitude, while necessary for healing, wasn't sufficient for living. Teaching Jake, watching River grow stronger, even the simple act of having another person to talk to. These things were breathing life back into parts of himself he'd thought were permanently damaged. River shifted in his sleep, one paw touching the walking stick where it rested on the floor. Even in dreams, The pup seemed to approve of the changes happening around him. Love was expanding beyond the boundaries of their cabin, creating ripples that would touch more lives than either man or dog could yet imagine. The first hint of autumn painted the aspens gold when Sarah arrived with an unexpected proposal. She found Jed and Jake working on the cabin's front steps while River supervised from his cart, his head tilted with the serious expression he wore when observing important work. "The town's having its annual harvest festival next weekend," Sarah announced without preamble. "And I think River should enter the dog show." Jed looked up from the board he was planing. "Dog show? It's nothing fancy, just local pets showing off tricks, best costume, that sort of thing. But there's a special category this year for dogs who've overcome challenges." Sarah's voice carried gentle persuasion. "River would be perfect." Jake straightened, interest lighting his face. "That sounds amazing. River's got more personality than any dog I've ever met." "He's never been around crowds," Jed said, uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Which is exactly why he should go," Sarah countered. "He's part of this community whether you realize it or not. People have been asking about him." "People have been asking?" Jed felt that familiar urge to retreat, to protect both himself and River from the scrutiny of strangers. "Tom Bradley saw you two at the river last week. Mary Henderson spotted you at the feed store. Word gets around in a small town, Mr. Crane. People are curious about the mountain man and his remarkable dog." River, as if understanding he was the topic of conversation, rolled his cart closer to the group. His tail wagged as he looked between the three humans, clearly picking up on the excitement in their voices. Jake knelt beside River, scratching behind his ears. "What do you think, boy? Want to show the town what you can do?" The decision, when it came, surprised everyone, including Jed himself. What would he have to do? Sarah's smile was radiant. "Just be himself. Maybe demonstrate how he uses his cart. Show off some of the tricks you've taught him. The judges look for spirit, personality, the bond between dog and owner." "I'm not his owner," Jed said quietly. "I'm his friend." Even better. The following week became a whirlwind of preparation. Jake threw himself into helping River practice basic commands and tricks. The pup had learned to respond to verbal cues, to navigate obstacles, even to retrieve small items despite his mobility limitations. More importantly, River's confidence had grown exponentially. The terrified, drowning puppy Jed had pulled from the river was now a spirited, joyful dog who approached each day with enthusiasm and curiosity. "He's not the same animal," Sarah observed during one of her visits. "Physically, yes, but mentally and emotionally, he's transformed." Jed had to agree. River no longer saw his cart as a burden but as freedom. He'd learned to navigate stairs, rough terrain, even shallow water. His upper body had grown strong from compensating for his paralyzed hindquarters, and his endurance was remarkable. The night before the festival, Jed found himself nervous in a way he hadn't been in decades. River seemed to sense his anxiety, positioning his cart close to Yet's chair and resting his head against his knee. "What if they stare at you, boy?" Jed murmured. "What if they see you as broken instead of brave?" Jake looked up from where he sat by the fireplace, polishing the hand-carved walking stick he'd completed. "Mr. Crane, can I tell you something my grandmother used to say?" Jed nodded. "She said courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway." Jake's young face was serious. "Rivers taught me that. Every day he gets up and chooses to be happy, to trust, to try new things. That's real courage." The festival dawned crisp and clear. Calico Bend's main street had been transformed with colorful bunting, food booths, and a makeshift stage where local musicians would perform. The dog show was scheduled for mid-afternoon in the park, adjacent to the town square dot. As they approached the registration table, Jed felt River's excitement through the leash. The pup's head was high, his ears forward, taking in all the new sights and sounds with obvious delight. "Well, I'll be," said the elderly woman running registration. "This must be the famous river we've been hearing about." "Famous?" Jed questioned. "Oh my, yes. Dr. Mitchell's been telling everyone about the miraculous recovery, and Jake here has been bragging about his training skills." She smiled warmly at River. "What a handsome fellow you are." River's tail wagged furiously, and he performed a perfect sit command without being asked. The woman laughed with delight. "He knows he's special, doesn't he?" The competition itself was more celebration than contest. River navigated the obstacle course with determination and joy, his cart rolling smoothly over the specially designed ramps and around the gentle turns. When called upon to demonstrate his tricks, he responded with enthusiasm that drew applause from the gathered crowd. But it was during the special bond portion of the judging that something magical happened. River, perhaps overwhelmed by all the attention and activity, suddenly rolled his cart directly to Jed and pressed against his legs, seeking comfort and reassurance. Jed knelt and gathered the pup into his arms, cart and all. River relaxed immediately, his trust in his human absolute and visible to everyone watching. The crowd fell silent, touched by the obvious depth of love between the gruff mountain man and his brave companion. "Ladies and gentlemen," the judge announced, "I think we have our winner in the special recognition category." The blue ribbon was small and simple, but as they pinned it to River's cart, Jed felt something shift inside his chest. The entire town was applauding, not out of pity, but out of genuine admiration for River's spirit and their bond. Sarah appeared at his shoulder. "How does it feel to be part of the community again?" Jed looked around at the smiling faces, at Jake beaming with pride, at River wearing his ribbon like a badge of honor. "Different than I expected," he admitted. "Better." That evening, back at the cabin, Jed carefully placed River's blue ribbon on the mantel next to Emma's photograph. River watched from his cart, tail still wagging from the day's excitement. "Your mother would have been so proud today," Jed told the photograph softly. "Not just of River, but of all of us. We did good, Em. We chose love over fear." Jake had gone home to share the victory with his family, but not before promising to return the next morning. The cabin felt different now, not like a fortress against the world, but like a home that was part of something larger. River's blue ribbon caught the firelight, a symbol of acceptance, courage, and the transformative power of community. The dog who had been left to drown had become a bridge, connecting his isolated human to a world full of people ready to celebrate rather than judge. For the first time in 30 years, Jed fell asleep not as a hermit hiding from life, but as a man who belonged somewhere, surrounded by love both given and received. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a nervous-looking courier who refused to make eye contact. Jed signed for the certified mail with growing unease, noting the return address, Meridian Development Corporation, Denver, Colorado. Inside the manila envelope were official documents that made his blood run cold. A notice of tax delinquency dating back 15 years, a claim that his property had been purchased at auction for unpaid taxes, an eviction notice giving him 30 days to vacate the land he'd called home for 3 decades. "That's impossible," Jed muttered, spreading the papers across his kitchen table. River rolled his cart closer, sensing his human's distress. But the documents looked legitimate. Stamps, seals, legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign tongue. According to the papers, Meridian Development had purchased his 200 acres of mountain property for $50,000 in back taxes and fees. They planned to develop it into a luxury mountain resort. Yet's hand shook as he examined each page. He'd always paid his taxes, had the receipts in a filing box to prove it. But the documents claimed payments had been misdirected due to an error in the county recording system. That attempts to contact him had failed because he was a transient resident with no fixed address. The final insult was a letter from Meridian's CEO offering to hire him as a caretaker for the new resort, given his familiarity with the terrain. The condescending tone made Yet's jaw clench with rage. Jake arrived for work an hour later and found Jed staring at the papers. River pressed against his side in silent support. "Mr. Crane? What's wrong?" Jed wordlessly handed over the documents. Jake's face grew pale as he read, his jaw tightening with each page. This can't be legal," Jake said finally. "You've lived here forever. This is your home." "Law's the law," Jed said flatly, though his voice carried a defeated tone Jake had never heard before. "Looks like they got me fair and square. But you paid your taxes, right? You've got records?" Jed nodded toward a metal filing box. "Every year, religiously. But if they say the payments were misdirected," he shrugged helplessly. Jake was already moving toward the filing box. "Let me see those receipts." As Jake rifled through years of meticulously kept records, Jed found himself looking around the cabin with new eyes. Every hand-hewn beam, every stone in the fireplace, every board in the floor. He'd built this place with his own hands. It wasn't just shelter. It was the physical manifestation of his grief, his healing, his gradual return to life. And River, where? Would River go? The pup had never known any other home. This mountain sanctuary was where he'd learned to trust, to love, to overcome his limitations. The thought of River, confused and frightened in some new environment, made Yet's chest tight with anxiety. "Mr. Crane," Jake's voice was urgent. "Look at this." Jake held up a receipt from 8 years ago, pointing to the county clerk's stamp. "See this number? It doesn't match the property number on these legal documents." Jed examined the receipt more closely. Jake was right. There was a discrepancy in the property identification numbers. "And look here," Jake continued, pulling out more documents. "Every single one of your tax payments was made to the correct account. These receipts prove it." Hope flickered in Yet's chest, but he forced it down. "Doesn't matter what we can prove, if their lawyers say otherwise." That's when the second bombshell hit. Jake's face had gone ashen as he stared at the Meridian Development letterhead. "Jake? What is it?" "My dad," Jake whispered. "He's been working for Meridian Development since he lost his job at the mill. That's why he sent me up here that first day. He was supposed to gather information about your property, find out if there were any valuable assets, check if you had legal representation." The betrayal hit Jed like a physical blow. All those weeks of trust, of teaching Jake, of watching him bond with River, it had all been a lie. A setup. "You've been spying on me," Jed said quietly, his voice more hurt than angry. "No." Jake's response was immediate and passionate. "I mean, yes, at first that's what my dad wanted, but I never told him anything useful. I couldn't. Not after." He gestured helplessly around the cabin. "Not after you gave me a chance. Not after you became," his voice broke, "you are more of a father to me than he's ever been." River whimpered, picking up on the emotional tension. He maneuvered his cart between the two men, looking back and forth with worried eyes. "My dad's been drinking worse since he started this job," Jake continued desperately. "Says Meridian pays him to find legal loopholes to identify properties they can acquire cheap. But I swear to you, Mr. Crane, I never gave him any information." "That could hurt you." Jed studied Jake's face, seeing genuine anguish there. The boy was telling the truth. Yet's instincts about people, honed by decades of solitude, were rarely wrong. "What else do you know about Meridian's operation?" Jed asked. "They've been buying up mountain properties all over Montana and Colorado. Dad says they target isolated landowners, people without family or legal connections. They look for technicalities, clerical errors, anything they can use to challenge ownership." Jed sank into his chair, the weight of the situation crushing down on him. So what you're saying is, they specifically targeted me because I'm alone. Because they thought you were alone, Jake corrected. But you're not. You've got River. You've got me. You've got Dr. Mitchell and half the town rooting for you after the festival. The words hung in the air like a lifeline. Jed looked at River, who had positioned himself protectively beside the chair. The pup's brown eyes held unwavering faith that his human would find a way to fix this problem. We need to call Sarah, Jed said finally. If I'm going to fight this, I'll need help. Sarah arrived within the hour, bringing with her a calm competence that immediately steadied Yet's nerves. She examined the legal documents with the thoroughness of someone accustomed to reading contracts and legal fine print. This is fraud, she declared after studying Jake's evidence. Pure and simple. Meridian is counting on you not having legal representation, not knowing your rights. Can we prove it? Jed asked. With these receipts and Jake's testimony about his father's role? Absolutely. But we need to move fast. 30 days isn't much time to mount a legal defense. That evening, as Sarah and Jake worked on documenting their case, Jed sat with River by the fireplace. The pup seemed to understand that their world was under threat. He stayed closer than usual, occasionally pressing his nose against Yet's hand as if offering comfort. I'm scared, boy, Jed admitted quietly. Not just of losing this place, but of losing you. Of losing everything we've built together. River's response was to maneuver his cart so he could rest his head on Yet's lap. A gesture of complete trust and faith. Jake looked up from the documents he was organizing. Mr. Crane, there's something else. Something I think you should know. Jed braced himself for another blow. My dad's not just working for Meridian. He's in debt to them. Gambling debts. They're using that to control him, make him do things that aren't legal. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. If we expose their fraud, it might actually help him get free of them too. The complexity of the situation was staggering. What had started as a simple land grab was revealing itself as part of a larger pattern of corporate exploitation and human manipulation. But as Jed looked around at the people gathered in his cabin, Sarah organizing legal strategies, Jake documenting evidence despite the personal cost, River maintaining his steady faith, he realized something profound had changed. He was no longer facing this crisis alone. The legal documents sat on his table like a declaration of war. But surrounding them were the tools of resistance. Tax receipts, witness testimony, and most importantly, a community of people willing to fight for justice. For 30 years, Jed had hidden from the world's complexities and cruelties. Now the world had found him anyway. But this time, he wasn't a broken man fleeing from loss. He was a man with something precious to protect, surrounded by people willing to stand with him. The battle for his home was about to begin. Within 24 hours of Sarah's phone calls, Yet's cabin became the unlikely headquarters of a grassroots legal defense. Word had spread through Calico Bend with the speed that only small towns could manage, and the response was overwhelming. Mary Henderson from the general store arrived with boxes of office supplies and a determination that surprised everyone. That corporation thinks they can waltz in here and steal from our neighbors. They picked the wrong town. Tom Bradley, a man who'd first spotted Jed rescuing River, brought detailed maps of the area and contact information for other property owners who might be facing similar threats. Been hearing rumors about Meridian for months. You might not be their only target. Even Father Miguel from the Catholic Church appeared with a petition he'd started gathering signatures for over 300 names of people supporting Yet's right to keep his land. Sarah had contacted a lawyer friend from her college days, someone who specialized in property law and had experience fighting corporate land grabs. Elena Vasquez was driving up from Billings and would arrive by evening. But it was the arrival of Jake's mother that brought the real breakthrough. Linda Morrison was a small woman worn thin by years of worry and overwork, but her eyes burned with fierce determination. She knocked on Jed's door at midday, clutching a manila folder to her chest. "Mr. Crane, I'm Jake's mother. I need to show you something." Jake paled when he saw her. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "What I should have done months ago," Linda said. Firmly, she opened the folder and spread documents across Jed's kitchen table. "These are copies of everything my husband brought home from Meridian. I've been keeping them, hoping he'd come to his senses." The documents were damning. Internal memos discussing the deliberate misdirection of tax payments. Instructions to field agents about identifying vulnerable property owners. Most shocking of all, a map showing dozens of properties across Montana that Meridian had targeted for acquisition through similar fraudulent means. "They've done this before," Sarah breathed, studying the papers. "Multiple times." "My husband's not a bad man," Linda said quietly, her voice heavy with pain. "But the gambling debts Meridian owns him. They threatened to have him arrested if he didn't cooperate." Jake put his arm around his mother's shoulders. "How did you get these?" "Copied them while he was passed out drunk. Been building a case file for weeks, but I didn't know what to do with it." She looked at Jed with tears in her eyes. "When Jake told me what kind of man you really are, how you've helped him, I couldn't let them destroy you." Elena Vasquez arrived that evening, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who exuded the kind of quiet confidence that came from winning difficult cases. She studied the evidence spread across Jed's table with the intensity of a hawk examining prey. "This is a prosecutor's dream," she said finally. "Clear evidence of fraud, conspiracy, and systematic exploitation. But," she looked directly at Jed, "fighting this will be expensive and time-consuming. Meridian has deep pockets and aggressive lawyers. Are you prepared for that kind of battle?" Jed looked around his cabin at the people who had rallied to his defense. Sarah sorting documents with methodical precision. Jake and his mother working together to organize evidence. River sleeping peacefully by the fireplace, trusting that the humans he loved would protect their home. "I spent 30 years running from fights that mattered," Jed said quietly. "I'm not running anymore." Elena smiled for the first time since arriving. "Good, because I have an idea that might turn this whole thing in our favor." Her plan was audacious and risky. Rather than simply defending against Meridian's claims, they would go on the offensive. Elena would file a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the landowners Meridian had defrauded, using Linda Morrison's evidence to demonstrate a pattern of criminal behavior. "The key is timing," Elena explained. "Meridian expects you to roll over or, at best, mount a weak defense. They won't expect a coordinated counterattack backed by solid evidence. But there was a catch. Jake's father would have to testify against Meridian, risking criminal charges himself. It was a decision that could tear the Morrison family apart. "He won't do it," Jake said flatly. "He's too scared." "He might," Linda said slowly, "if he thinks it's the only way to protect his family. If he thinks there's a chance for redemption." That night, as the others finalized legal strategies, Jed found himself alone with River by the fireplace. The pup seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. He stayed closer than usual, occasionally pressing his nose against Jed's hand. "What? If we lose, boy?" Jed murmured. "What if they take our home anyway?" River's response was to maneuver his cart so he could rest his head on Jed's lap, a gesture of complete trust. The message was clear. Wherever Jed went, River would follow. Home wasn't just a place, it was being together. The realization struck Jed like lightning. For 30 years, he'd thought of this cabin as his fortress against the world. But River had shown him something different. Home wasn't about walls and boundaries. It was about connection, love, the courage to remain open despite the risk of loss. Even if they lost the legal battle, Meridian couldn't take away what really mattered. They couldn't steal the bond between him and River, the friendship he built with Jake, the community that had embraced them both. Those things existed independent of property lines and legal documents. The next morning brought unexpected news. Linda Morrison called to say her husband wanted to meet with Elena. He'd spent the night reviewing the evidence. His wife had copied and finally understood the full scope of what Meridian was doing. "He says he's ready to make things right," Linda reported, "but he wants guarantees about protection from criminal charges." Elena was cautiously optimistic. "If he's willing to testify and provide additional evidence, I can probably negotiate immunity in exchange for his cooperation." The meeting was set for that afternoon at the cabin. Ray Morrison arrived looking like a man who'd aged years in a single week. His hand shook as he accepted Yet's offer of coffee, and his eyes couldn't quite meet anyone's gaze. "I know what you all must think of me," he began. "What I did was wrong. I let fear and desperation drive me to hurt good people." Jake sat across from his father, his young face a mixture of disappointment and hope. "Why, Dad? Why didn't you just ask for help?" Ray's voice broke slightly. "Because I was ashamed. Because I thought I could fix it myself. Because," he looked directly at Jed for the first time, "because I forgot what it meant to have integrity." The conversation that followed was painful but necessary. Ray laid out everything he knew about Meridian's operations, the systematic targeting of isolated landowners, the deliberate manipulation of county records, the network of compromised officials who facilitated the fraud. But more than that, he provided something invaluable: insider knowledge of Meridian's weaknesses. The company was heavily leveraged, dependent on completing their Montana acquisitions to satisfy investors. A significant legal challenge could destabilize their entire operation. "There's something else," Ray said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket. "Security camera footage from the county clerk's office shows Meridian employees accessing and altering property records without authorization." Elena's eyes lit up. "That's criminal evidence. With this, we don't just have a civil case. We have grounds for criminal prosecution." As the pieces of their counterattack fell into place, Jed felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: the satisfaction of standing up for what was right, not just for himself, but for others. This wasn't just about saving his cabin anymore. It was about protecting his community from predators who targeted the vulnerable. That evening, Sarah helped him draft a community petition that would be circulated throughout the county. The goal was to identify other landowners who might have been targeted by Meridian and to build a coalition of people willing to fight back. "You realize what you've started here?" Sarah asked as they worked. "This isn't just about your property anymore. This is about standing up to corporate bullies who think they can exploit rural communities." Jed looked at the petition, hundreds of signatures already, with more coming in every hour. "Good," he said simply. "Some fights are worth having." River had fallen asleep in his cart beside Yet's chair, exhausted by all the activity, but secure in the knowledge that his pack was strong and united. The blue ribbon from the Harvest Festival caught the firelight from where it hung on his cart, a reminder of how far they'd all come in 3 days. They would face Meridian's lawyers in court. The odds were still against them, but they were no longer fighting alone. They had truth, they had evidence, and most importantly, they had each other. For the first time since receiving the eviction notice, Jed felt genuinely hopeful. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, man, dog, and community, united in the belief that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The battle for their home was about to begin, but Jed was no longer afraid. He had found his courage in the most unlikely place, in the love of a broken puppy who had taught him that being vulnerable wasn't weakness. It was the greatest strength of all. The courthouse in Helena was intimidating in its formal grandeur: marble columns, polished floors, and an atmosphere that seemed designed to make ordinary people feel small. Jed had never been comfortable in such places, but as he walked through the security checkpoint with River's cart rolling beside him, he felt the quiet strength that came from knowing he was fighting for something that mattered. Elena had warned them that Meridian would bring an army of lawyers, and she hadn't exaggerated. The corporate legal team occupied an entire row of the courtroom's 6 attorneys in expensive suits, each carrying briefcases that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. By contrast, their side looked humble. Elena in her practical business attire, Jed in his best flannel shirt and clean jeans, Jake wearing the tie Sarah had insisted he borrow. But filling the gallery behind them were faces that gave Jed courage: Sarah, Linda Morrison, Father Miguel, Mary Henderson, and dozens of other Calico Bend residents who had driven the 3 hours to Helena to show their support. Most importantly, River was there. The courthouse had initially balked at allowing a dog inside, but Elena had argued successfully that River was essential evidence, the very symbol of what Jed was fighting to protect. Now the golden pup sat in his cart beside Jed's chair, his presence a calm anchor in the storm of legal proceedings. Judge Margaret Chen was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who commanded immediate respect. She reviewed the preliminary documents with careful attention before calling the court to order. This is a hearing to determine the validity of property ownership claims regarding the Crane property in Bitterroot County, she announced. Petitioner, Meridian Development Corporation, claims legal ownership through tax sale proceedings. The respondent, Jedediah Crane, contests these claims. Counselor Martinez, you may proceed. Meridian's lead attorney was a polished man named David Martinez, who spoke with the kind of confidence that came from rarely losing. He presented their case methodically: the tax delinquency notices, the properly executed sale procedures, the legal documentation of ownership transfer. Your Honor, Martinez concluded, this is a simple matter of property law. Mr. Crane failed to pay his taxes as required by law. The property was legally sold to satisfy the debt. My client's ownership is clear and uncontestable. Elena stood for their response, and Jed felt a flicker of pride at how composed she appeared in the face of Meridian's intimidation tactics. Your Honor, what we have here is not a legal tax sale, but a systematic fraud perpetrated against vulnerable landowners. With the court's permission, I'd like to present evidence that will demonstrate Meridian Development's pattern of criminal behavior. The first piece of evidence was Jed's meticulously kept tax receipts. Elena walked the judge through each payment, demonstrating clearly that taxes had been paid in full and on time for 30 consecutive years. The question then becomes, Elena said, how can a property be sold for unpaid taxes when the taxes were, in fact, paid? Martinez objected. Your Honor, clerical errors in tax processing don't invalidate properly executed legal procedures. This wasn't a clerical error, Elena responded smoothly. This was deliberate misdirection of payments as part of a fraudulent scheme. She then called Ray Morrison to the witness stand. Jake's father looked nervous but determined as he was sworn in. His testimony was devastating, detailed descriptions of how Meridian employees had deliberately interfered with tax payment processing, how they had targeted isolated landowners specifically because they were unlikely to have legal representation. Mr. Morrison, Elena asked, what were you told about Mr. Crane specifically? Ray's voice was steady despite his obvious distress. They said he was perfect, an old hermit with no family, no connections, no one who would fight for him if they took his land. Martinez's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to portray Ray as an unreliable witness with his own legal troubles. But the man's genuine remorse and detailed knowledge of Meridian's operations came through clearly. The turning point came when Elena presented the security footage Ray had provided. The video showed Meridian employees accessing county computer systems and altering property records. The judge watched in silence as the evidence of systematic fraud played out on the courtroom monitors. Your Honor, Elena said as the video concluded. This is not about property taxes. This is about corporate fraud on a massive scale, targeting rural communities and vulnerable individuals. Then came the moment Jed had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure, his own testimony. As he stood to take the witness stand, River whimpered softly, sensing his human's anxiety. "May I bring my dog?" Jed asked the judge. He's part of what this is all about. Judge Chun studied River for a moment, noting the pup's calm demeanor and obvious intelligence. Permission granted. Jed wheeled River's cart to the witness stand and was sworn in with one hand on the Bible and the other resting on River's head. The simple gesture of connection gave him the courage he needed. Alana's questions were gentle but thorough. Jed told his story, the 30 years of solitude, the rescue of River, the gradual healing that had led him back to community and connection. His voice remained steady as he described what the mountain property meant to him, how it had been his sanctuary, and was now his home. "Mr. Crane," Elena asked, "why is it important to you to keep this land?" Jed looked down at River, who gazed back with complete trust and love. "Because it's where I learned to live again. It's where River and I found each other. It's where I discovered that broken things can heal if they're given the right care and enough love." The courtroom was silent as his words hung in the air. Even Martinez seemed momentarily affected by the quiet dignity of Yet's testimony. "And if you lose this case?" Elena asked gently. "Then we'll find another way to be a family," Jed said simply. "But I won't let them steal what we've built without a fight." As Jed returned to his seat, River's collar caught the courtroom light, the simple leather collar Jed had made for him during those first weeks together, worn smooth by months of wear and representing the bond that had started with one man's decision to save a drowning puppy. Martinez's cross-examination of Jed was brutal and calculated. The corporate lawyer attacked from every angle, questioning Yet's mental stability due to his years of isolation, suggesting that his attachment to the property was unhealthy, even implying that his care for a disabled dog demonstrated poor judgment. "Mr. Crane," Martinez said with thinly veiled condescension, "isn't it true that you've lived as a hermit for 30 years, avoiding normal human contact?" "I lived alone, yes," Jed replied steadily. "And isn't it true that this isolation was the result of mental instability following a family tragedy?" Elena objected, but Jed held up his hand. "I'll answer," he said quietly. "Yes, I was broken after I lost my family. Yes, I ran away from life and from people. But that doesn't make me crazy, and it doesn't mean I don't deserve to keep my home." Martinez pressed harder. "Mr. Crane, you've testified that this dog, this disabled animal, somehow changed your life. Don't you think that's a rather fantastical claim?" At the word, disabled, River lifted his head and looked directly at Martinez with what could only be described as dignity. The gesture was so human-like, so clearly intelligent, that a murmur ran through the courtroom. "There's nothing fantastical about love," Jed said, his voice growing stronger. "River taught me that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. He taught me that you can build a good life, even when you're not perfect. He taught me that running away from love doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you'll miss out on joy." "Your Honor," Martinez said, turning away from Jed dismissively, "we're here to determine property ownership, not to listen to sentimental stories about pets." That's when something unexpected happened. River, perhaps responding to the harsh tone, in Martinez's voice, maneuvered his cart forward until he was directly between Jed and the corporate lawyer. The pup sat perfectly still, his brown eyes fixed on Martinez with an unwavering gaze that somehow managed to be both gentle and challenging. The courtroom fell silent. Even Judge Chen leaned forward, watching this small drama unfold. "Mr. Martinez," the judge said quietly, I'd suggest you remember that this courtroom operates on respect for all who enter it. Please continue with your examination." But Martinez's rhythm was broken. River's simple act of protection had demonstrated more clearly than any testimony the depth of the bond Elena had been describing. The liar struggled through a few more questions before giving up in frustration. Judge Chen called for a brief recess, and the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversation. Jed knelt beside River's cart, scratching behind the pup's ears. "Thank you, boy," he whispered. "You've got better courtroom instincts than most lawyers." When court reconvened, Elena called her final witnesses, 3 other landowners who had been targeted by Meridian's fraudulent schemes. Their testimony painted a clear picture of corporate predation, of a company that systematically exploited the vulnerable for profit. Then came Jake's turn to testify. The young man walked to the witness stand with newfound confidence, the result of months of growth under Yet's guidance. "Mr. Morrison," Elena began, "please tell the court about your relationship with Mr. Crane." Jake's testimony was powerful in its simplicity. He described how Jed had transformed his life, teaching him skills and self-respect, showing him what it meant to be a man of integrity. But more than that, he testified about the community that had formed around Jed and River. Before Mr. Crane and River, our town was just a collection of people living near each other, Jake said. But watching them heal together, seeing how they brought out the best in everyone around them, it made us realize we could be something more. We could be a real community. Martinez's final argument was polished but increasingly desperate. He stuck to the legal technicalities, arguing that regardless of Meridian's methods, the property sale was legally executed and should stand. Elena's closing was passionate and persuasive. She painted a picture of corporate greed run amok, of a company that preyed on the vulnerable and corrupted the very systems meant to protect property rights. "Your Honor," Elena concluded, "this case is about more than property law. It's about whether we'll allow corporations to steal from our most vulnerable citizens through fraud and intimidation. Mr. Crane isn't just fighting for his home. He's fighting for the principle that right matters more than might. That justice isn't just for those who can afford expensive lawyers." Judge Shen retired to consider her decision, leaving everyone to wait in tense silence. The gallery remained packed with supporters, their presence a testament to how much the community had invested in this outcome. River seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. He positioned his cards so he could see both Jed and the judge's bench, as if understanding that his family's future hung in the balance. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes, Judge Chun returned. Her expression was unreadable as she called the court to order. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented," she began, her voice carrying the weight of judicial authority. "This case involves serious allegations of fraud and systematic corruption of legal processes." She paused, looking directly at the Meridian legal team. "In my 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such clear evidence of corporate malfeasance. The defendant's claim of legal ownership is not only invalid, it is the product of criminal conspiracy." A collective intake of breath filled the courtroom. River's tail began to wag, as if he understood that the words were good news. "Therefore," Judge Chun continued, her voice ringing with finality, "I hereby rule in favor of the respondent, Jedediah Crane. Meridian Development Corporation's claims to the property are dismissed with prejudice." The gavel came down with a sound like thunder, and the courtroom erupted in cheers. The celebration that followed the court victory was brief but heartfelt. As people filed out of the courthouse, shaking hands and exchanging congratulations, Jed found himself overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. But beneath the joy was a growing concern. River had been unusually quiet during the drive back to Calico Bend, and his breathing seemed labored by the time they reached the cabin that evening. River was clearly struggling. Sarah examined him. Immediately, her veterinary training evident in the gentle but thorough way she checked his vital signs. "His heart is under stress," she said quietly, pulling Jed aside. The excitement of the day, the travel, the emotional intensity, it's been too much for his system. The words hit Jed like a physical blow. After everything they'd fought for, after winning their battle to keep their home, was he going to lose River anyway? That night, River slept fitfully beside Yet's chair, his small body working harder than it should to draw each breath. Jed stayed. Awake, one hand resting on River's side, feeling the too rapid beating of his heart. "Stay with me, boy," Jed whispered into the darkness. "We won. We get to keep our home. We did it together." River's eyes opened briefly, focusing on Yet's face. With that same unwavering trust and love that had sustained them both through months of challenges, his tail gave the faintest wag before he closed his eyes again. The next 3 days passed in a blur of quiet vigil. Jake came every morning and evening, helping with River's care and sitting with him in companionable silence. Sarah stopped by twice daily, monitoring River's condition with professional concern and personal heartbreak. On the third evening, as autumn twilight painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, River made an obvious effort to get to his cart. With Yet's help, he managed to position himself for one last ride, not around the cabin, but outside to the spot by the river where Jed had first found him. They sat together in the gathering darkness, man and dog at the place where their journey had begun. River's breathing was peaceful now, no longer labored. He seemed content to simply be there with his human, watching the water flow past in the moonlight. "Thank you, River," Jed said softly. "Thank you for teaching me how to live again. Thank you for showing me that love is worth the risk of losing it." River shifted slightly, pressing closer to Yet's side. His eyes remained bright and aware, but there was a quality of completion in his expression, as if he knew he'd fulfilled his purpose. When the end came, it was peaceful. River simply closed his eyes and let go, surrounded by love and secure in the knowledge that he had saved his human just as surely as his human had saved him. The funeral was unlike anything Calico Bend had ever seen. Half the town turned out to honor a dog who had somehow become a symbol of hope, resilience, and the transformative power of love. They gathered by the river where River's story had begun, sharing memories of how the brave little pup had touched their lives. Father Miguel spoke about the sacred nature of the bond between humans and animals. Sarah talked about River's medical miracle, not his physical recovery, which had been limited, but his emotional healing that had rippled out to heal an entire community. Jake, now confident and articulate in a way that would have been unimaginable months earlier, spoke last. River taught us that being broken doesn't mean being worthless. He showed us that with enough love and determination, any life can have meaning and purpose. Jed placed the memorial stone himself, a beautiful piece of Montana granite that Jake had helped him carve, inscribed simply, "River, he saved us all." The blue ribbon from the Harvest Festival was tied around the stone, fluttering in the mountain breeze like a small flag of victory dot as the gathering dispersed. Sarah remained behind with Jed. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the river flow past the memorial stone. "What will you do now?" she asked gently. Jed considered the question. The cabin felt different without River's presence, but it didn't feel empty. Too much love had filled it. Too much life had been lived within its walls. "Jake's been asking if he can move into the workshop," Jed said. "His father's getting treatment for his gambling addiction, and the family needs space to heal. I think I'd like to help with that." Sarah smiled. And there's a litter of abandoned puppies at the animal shelter in Helena. 3 of them have special needs. One's missing a leg, another has vision problems." Yet's voice grew stronger. "I thought maybe River would approve if we gave them the kind of chance he had." "I think River would be very proud," Sarah agreed. 6 months later, Jed's property had indeed become a sanctuary, but not the kind Meridian Development had envisioned. The workshop had been converted into comfortable living quarters for Jake, who was now enrolled in a vocational program while working part-time with Jed. The cabin had been expanded to accommodate the 3 rescue dogs who had joined their unconventional family. Sarah had become a regular fixture, her relationship with Jed deepening into something that honored the past while embracing the future. The legal victory over Meridian had led to criminal charges against the corporation and financial compensation for all the landowners they had defrauded. But the real victory was visible every morning when Jed stepped onto his porch and saw Jake working in the garden, the 3 rescue dogs playing in their adaptive mobility gear, and Sarah's truck parked beside the cabin. River's memorial stone caught the morning light, a permanent reminder that love multiplies when it's freely given. On the anniversary of River's rescue, Jed stood by the memorial with his new canine companions. The golden retriever with 3 legs had taken to swimming in the shallow water, while the nearly blind border collie navigated by scent and sound with remarkable skill. The 3rd dog, a shepherd mix with paralyzed hindquarters, rolled around in a cart that was an improved version of the one Jed had built for River. "See that, River?" Jed said to the memorial stone. "Your story isn't over. It's just beginning again, one rescued soul at a time." The mountain wind carried his words downstream, where they mingled with the sound of flowing water and the distant laughter of his chosen family. River's legacy lived on not in the preservation of one man's solitude, but in the creation of a community built on love, acceptance, and the revolutionary idea that broken things could become beautiful again. The hermit of Bitterroot Mountain had become its heart instead, and every sunrise brought new proof that the smallest acts of compassion could indeed change everything.